Welcome to another episode. Today I'm joined by Christopher Goers, one of the co founders of Anoma. Super excited for this conversation. Chris, I was going through some of your previous podcasts, and recently you said that Anoma has gone through a lot of changes over the last few years, and the vision has changed. So I would love to sort of start there and kind of understand how has the vision changed, what is it today, and where does everything stand?
Well, thank you for having me. I will try to provide some entertaining and maybe even educational content. You, the viewer, be the judge of that. But yes, so Anoma, fundamentally, Anoma is a distributed operating system. We're trying to build a distributed operating system, by which we mean that Anoma tries to take a network of computers and abstract them as if it were one unified thing. Just like an operating system takes many different, heterogeneous pieces of hardware, laptops, servers, PCs, they have different chips, they have different, CPUs, different graphics cards, different hard drives, and an operating system tries to abstract all of those things as one sort of unified interface that you, a developer, can write programs against. And if you write, program for Windows, more or less it runs anywhere on any machine that runs Windows. Occasionally there will be weird bugs, but like that's the intention, right? Similarly, Anoma is trying to abstract over different types and capabilities of hardware, but what's different in building a distributed operating system is that not only are we trying to, build a unified interface over heterogeneous hardware, we're also trying to build a unified interface over a distributed network of computers. So
Mm,
as in where there are, computers or even kind of virtual computers like blockchains, right? Like wherever sort of messages are being processed in sequence, some state is being determined, right? State machines, you could think of it as. And the parts that have yeah, what's really basically the thing that you want to do is like take this complex distributed system and make it really simple for the application developer, for the user. When I interact with a complex network, whether it be if I go, in recording this podcast, right? Think of how many messages are bouncing around the world in recording this podcast. I mean, there's some data being collected through my video camera. It's going through a bunch of internet routing, probably Riverside, I don't know, sounds American, has some servers in San Francisco. Then they're using, God knows what analytics software, so some data is going there. I mean, there are probably millions of, at least hundreds of physical machines and millions of messages involved in just what we're doing now, right? And, if we think of, if it takes reasoning about hundreds of machines and millions of messages to write an application like this, like no one's going to do it, right? So over the years, different abstractions have been built up, but I think one really great advantage of the kind of crypto and blockchain approach to seeing distributed systems design and kind of distributed networks is that you can really look at the whole picture instead of trying and kind of look at it from sort of first principles or from protocol design principles and try to build clean abstractions, right? Like Ethereum, the protocol has nothing to do with Amazon Web Services directly, even if some Ethereum validators use Amazon Web Services, right? But Ethereum reasons just, okay, we'll have like an abstract computer that runs a full node and then it connects to other full nodes over the peer-to-peer network, and the protocol says what that computer has to do, but not, doesn't rely on some existing service configuration. So over the years, we didn't know, it started kind of more with this concept of intent and trying to understand how can we build a distributed system that serves the user. And I would say it's only over time that we've come to just an understanding of the importance of like that essential simplification, like kind of almost like the world computer concept, how to make this distributed network appear as if it were just a single machine that's simple to program and interact with. And, where that abstraction boundary works, where it kind of breaks down, how you have to carve the lines in between. We spent the time
mm.
working that out.
I mean, so the example that you explained of Riverside, like not a lot of people will kind of have a mental model to think of a crypto project with an application like Riverside, right? Because whenever I think of Ethereum or any sort of chain, I'm thinking about lending protocols or like some sort of exchange applications. But the way you've explained Anoma, it sounds like it's more generalized and abstract to build any sort of application, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, there are different layers and parts, and we're not, to be fair, we're not launching them all at once. Like, there's a lot of stuff, and we're sort of launching it in an order that really starts with, more crypto style, like being able to run transactions, Anoma transactions on different blockchains with protocol adapters. We've developed an eventual consistency state model, but we're not launching that at first. We're launching the totally ordered thing, which is, of course, what, most blockchain devs will be familiar with first. So there is a difference that's worth noting between the kind of architectural design, pretty clearly specified in papers and other things, and what we're actually launching soon. We want to launch. It's a complex project. We want to launch in stages. But yes, the design of at least a distributed operating system and the way we conceive it is general. So you could even use. I mean, it's not. We haven't done the engineering work to like optimize it for video streaming, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's important and substantial, and not just a theoretical architecture project. But the peer-to-peer layer, design that we have, for example, is totally compatible with this, and in fact can do some smart things. Like the internet's sort of an agglomerated, like it's a bunch of layers, right? And the
Mhm.
layers were built over decades. And they were built over decades during which understandings of what the internet was supposed to do changed substantially. For example, initially the internet had no cryptography. In fact, I don't think public cryptography was even invented. Some cryptographer can double check me on the dates, but it was just like the internet was like a project for Tim Berners-Lee and people at CERN to send physics results to. It was a very high trust environment. You didn't need, it wasn't such an adversarial model. You weren't trying to do commerce, etc. Right? Then, decades later, we've added cryptography on top of the internet, but in, I would argue a sort of bolted on slapdash way. In particular, the internet uses a basic identity, which is physical, not cryptographic, right? IP addresses are physical. And then we built the second sort of DNS, SSL, CA, certificate authority chain layer on top of this, which tries to provide, more cryptographically authenticated identity, but a lot of the routing is still based on physical identity. So
Mhm.
if you look at what a complex like a Slack is a good example. So Slack tries to provide this like unified idea of a user, right? I log into Slack and I want, Slack tries to make me feel like it's me, even if I have multiple devices, right? It tracks which messages
Yeah.
I've read across the different devices. It sort of does a bunch of stuff to synchronize all the messages in the background. This is quite complicated. Effectively, what Slack has to do is build a separate like identity architecture on top of the existing internet and separate state synchronization architecture on top of the existing internet just to provide this unified user identity. Because of course, if Slack only sent messages to IP addresses, as soon as I roam networks or switch devices, I would like, it would no longer be consistent, right? So Anoma can provide this kind of, because we rework the layers with cryptographic identity as the most fundamental component, and then routing happening based on that instead of physical identity, and state synchronization happening based on that instead of physical identity. A lot of the application developer's job becomes simpler. So if you want to build something complicated like Slack or Riverside, you don't need to, implement such complex distributed architectures yourself.
I mean,
If that
I'm
makes sense.
almost curious to ask, like, what made you look at the ecosystem and say, wait, maybe this needs to be rebuilt from first principles? Like, I don't want to build another chain or anything similar to anything we've seen before, but I'm going to like do it my way. So, what did you see in the ecosystem that you felt was missing that you're trying to achieve now with Anoma?
It's a good question. I would say a few things. In part, a clear theory of what product crypto was supposed to provide to people that wasn't just tokens that you can trade for each other. No judgment. I'm not against trading tokens, but it's not a product.
Hmm.
It's a financial accounting mechanism, and financial accounting mechanisms are fine, but they can only exist sustainably if they serve some other broader purpose, right? So I wanted to spend time thinking about that. I mean, that's kind of why we started with this, intent concept, which is still very present in Anoma. We've implemented a generalized form of intents. But of course, intents, just the idea of an intent alone doesn't say too much about how the actual distributed system is supposed to work, right?
I mean, intent in itself is a pretty abstract term, like, it can mean anything.
Right, right, for sure. I mean, at least our formulation of it always includes two things: constraints and preferences.
Hmm.
And the idea is that the user sits sort of on the edge. You could think of the distributed system like a big graph, and the user sits on the edge of the graph. They're providing inputs, and we want to give them some control over what happens. Those are constraints. So like, concretely, I want to receive at least 5 ETH in my swap. That's a constraint. And we want to give them the ability to express preferences. I want to get more ETH rather than less, all else remaining the same, right? And preferences they're not enforced, but they can be measured. So if you send different intents to different solvers and some of them do a better job getting you more ETH than others, you can change how you route over time. It creates this kind of feedback mechanism. So I think, I mean, that if you really look at like it is abstract, but it's at least mathematically precise. And if you look at what a kind of topology of a distributed network has to look like from that frame, some things become more apparent that might not be otherwise. One of the things that becomes apparent is that you really want the topology to be able to change over time. So rather, like if you have users and their intents, you assume are changing all the time because like the stuff they want to do in the real world is just different. What they want to do in the real world, that's kind of out of scope, but right. It's changing. That seems like a
Yeah.
fair assumption. And if it's changing, then, what kind of topology, like which nodes are connected to each other in the network, where intent should go, where which transaction should be ordered, well, by consequence, that also needs to change all the time. So it kind of, in some sense, it delineates which parts of your system design should be fixed and which parts should be allowed to change, right? Like topology should always be allowed to change. That's a pretty strict constraint in the end. Like a lot of stuff you just can't do if you want the topology to change. So.
Eh, So would you say like there have been any other experiments in crypto that we might have seen before that kind of resemble this approach, or are you like the first runners in this direction? Because I'm trying to form like a mental model in my head about where a regular user who knows about the crypto ecosystem can place Anoma in their minds right now.
Right. I think there have been attempts at many different components. Kind of part of the service we're trying to offer is to unify some of these disparate, pieces of technology and streams of thought into one coherent design.
Mhm.
An attempt maybe at the application level is a project like Circles, now part of Gnosis, I think, but that's working with these kinds of, different constraints and preferences from the user side of what kinds of credit relationships they want to have with other users, what kinds of allowance. Have you used the Circles app or
No, I don't think I've
no?
used it. Hmm.
Okay, it's kind of like um, like a local credit system. I mean, they've gone
Hmm.
through different incarnations, but you deal with some sort of explicit web of trust model. So you can mark which people you trust for which things. You can kind of pay through other people where you have trust roots. Also, a bit similar to Trust Lines, an old project. Um, and what's similar here to Anoma is that these applications at the application level really demonstrate like how the topology is changing all the time, right? And how the application needs to be able to handle that. And even the early version of Circles like kind of had a solver-like entity, right? Like years before there were sort of interop style solvers. Circles on Ethereum in 2016, 2017 had a solver algorithm just for this pathfinding and this web of trust.
I mean, from a very like dumb perspective, I would say it sounds so simple, right? Like you want to build a system in a way that it's changeable over time.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
why hasn't anyone else thought of this approach? Like why is everyone just building a chain and not building like a generalized system that can change with the evolving needs of crypto? Like I know it's a hard problem, like that's why maybe not a lot of people are going in this direction, but there has to be another answer to this.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe
That's a good
I'm
thing.
like the
That's a good
worst person to answer
thing.
this question. Or maybe other people are building it and I don't know. People are building like also we've tried to in some sense reduce the scope of, what we consider in our domain over the years. Like, there are lots of amazing teams working on faster zero knowledge proving systems, and Anoma is really just happy to use those. We're not trying to innovate at the sort of cryptographic optimization level, really trying to focus on the network architecture, distributed system architecture, application architecture level of things. Um, Honestly, I also just think that the crypto market has changed a lot over the years. And when Anoma started, it was possible to start and kind of recruit talent for and fundraise for very ambitious sort of research and development, like moonshot architecture projects, for
Mhm.
lack of a better way of describing it. And I don't think that environment is there anymore. Both in the kind of fundraising environment, it's a lot more product focused. I mean, a lot of the chains
Why
that
is
launch.
that? Like, is that just a sign of crypto maturing as an industry? Because I guess like when you've not seen too much innovation, people are dreamers, right? Like they want to build
Right.
a better system altogether. Like crypto started like that. Like we wanted to build a better financial system, better rails for money. But then as the industry is maturing, you're seeing more incremental improvements and not like projects that start from scratch and rethink everything.
I think part of it is maturing. I mean, I think, honestly, so at least in, I worked on Cosmos before. There were a lot of these like kind of moonshot architecture projects, and a lot of them raised a lot of money and didn't deliver very much. To be totally honest. I mean, maybe they're managed to keep their token price up or whatever, but I don't think they delivered a lot of valuable products for users. And often the structure of the capital was such that like all of the capital would be concentrated in these sort of L1 foundations, DAO type entities sometimes, who just kind of doled it out
Yeah.
to application developers, but it wasn't,
Everyone
you
knows
know,
about the Cosmos drama. So I feel like nobody is a stranger to that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also broad. I think it's broader than that. Like even in Ethereum, there's still a lot of abstraction in between the people who are making decisions about how the core distributed system should work and the
Hmm.
people who are thinking about what the user needs, right? And the more abstraction and organizational boundaries and kind of loose connections there are in between those groups, just the less coordinated. Like ultimately, who are we building this for, right? We're building it for people who use the system, in my view, and they're the customer is never wrong. Like maybe they can be imprecise, but if we can't consider the system designed from their perspective, then we're kind of just larping, right? About like, oh, this is cool. Like I don't know, like based roll-ups, like it's based, but which user asked for this product? Not to
Yeah.
pick on a specific thing, I just have never met a user who wanted this, even abstractly, right?
I
um
mean, a user doesn't even understand what is a based rollup. Like, yeah.
For sure, but there's also no like that's okay. Like a user of, I use Riverside and I don't understand their streaming packet, I don't know, efficiency maximization algorithms. But someone in Riverside understands that there are users and they want their video to be smooth and high definition, right? And then
Mhm.
they tell the guy who writes the algorithm, like, make it smooth and high definition. And he knows how to translate that into math, right? There's a connection.
You're saying
And
like that there's basically a feature that's desired by users, and then like the developers go back to the drawing board and fix the architecture based on the needs. And
right, right, right. I mean, there's this great law, is it Conway's law, or like the structure of the product delivered by an organization will reflect the communication structure of the organization delivering the product, right?
Mhm.
And right now, the kind of communication structure of crypto from the perspective of the user is just extremely fragmented
Mhm.
and not coordinated based on a central purpose of serving the user, but rather coordinated based on like lots of tokens and independent entities that want their own things and have sort of, often very, I don't know, maybe
Mhm.
they want to make a lot of money or they want like some ideology related goal.
Yeah.
And this
I
is
would
just,
almost like
it's fragmented.
blame the users equally, because I feel like the users, like myself, we don't really know what we want right now. So it's like half of the ecosystem is happy just trading meme coins and like buying assets, and that's always been the case, right? Like most people just buy crypto assets and then they're good with it. Like they would probably store it on exchanges. Maybe some of them would self custody, and that's okay. So I feel like there's a gap between user feedback in terms of what exists today and what would we like to see in the future. And if you think about the ecosystem right now, we're talking about more distribution strategies like the DeFi mullet, for example. That's
Hmm.
basically about going outside this existing user base and getting TradFi users. So there's more focus on distribution and adoption, and not as much focus as all year on innovation at the
Hmm.
architecture
Hmm.
and technical level. So I kind of like definitely agree with your take that there are no more moonshot tech projects anymore, and it's more distribution focused, and like there's more experimentation on those lines in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily unhealthy. Like maybe what the crypto market structure could use is some more M&A, so you get some combinations of the
Hmm.
kind of distribution focused, like understanding the users and the product really well, and the,
Yeah.
attack architecture teams who could sort of build something that's fundamentally more efficient for whatever. Um, but I also feel like crypto has short shifted itself by already like selecting out most of the other applications, right? Because like in the 2020 era or whenever, Ethereum and Bitcoin weren't very scalable, right? People were just starting on rollups. The only applications that really made sense to use with these very expensive blockchains with, not very usable peer-to-peer systems were, financial, right? Like trading in some form where you're willing to pay the fees. So now, indeed, that is what a lot of crypto users want. But we've also kind of like the users who don't want that, they just aren't even looking at crypto anymore. Like if
Hmm.
I talk to some random person, their impression of crypto is that it's, mostly a scam. And at the very least, it's like financial stuff, right? Like maybe it's almost converging to people's impression of TradFi, right? Like, what's my impression of Wall Street? I don't know. You can make a lot of money. It's not very interesting. There's a lot of grifting. The market structure is kind of inefficient.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean, so you said like a lot of the organizations are built on what the users are requesting, right? So I'm curious to hear what are users requesting from Anoma, or what type of users are you building for? Because if all of us feel like, okay, users don't really know where we're going or what we need, how do you as a founder place a directional bet that's good enough in the long term but also good enough in the short
that's a great question, and time will tell whether we have a good answer to it or not.
term?
I guess one of my, you know, I my hypothesis is that the backend sort of details of the backend database software don't really change too much what products are possible or like useful from a user perspective. They just allow you to, make different decisions about who has power in the system, distribute the economic gains or losses differently. It's more about topology. So a good example application that I like to look at is WeChat. WeChat
Hmm.
is kind of the super app that does everything. Like it does logistics, you can pay your taxes, you can send money, you can get a car, you can get food, you can get like anything delivered in major Chinese cities. You can chat with people. It's like a whole operating system all of its own, right? And of course, WeChat is run by a company and it's not encrypted and not decentralized at all. But the
Hmm.
product experience is great. So if we can build something, that's kind of what we think of some future Anoma super app that has a user-facing sort of product experience, really quite similar to that. But the entire backend is distributed, decentralized. When
Got
maybe
it.
you prefer, you can configure your preferences to like get goods from your friends first, or use the local lending library before you invoke this sort of large abstract economic coordination system.
I think
One
that's
thing to
a
think about.
great example, because like if the future is developers building super apps, because like WhatsApp has all of the features, Telegram has all of the features, Twitter is adding more and more features. Like
Right,
so once any application sort of cracks PMF, they always expand into like the super app direction,
right,
right? So
right.
as an infrastructure builder, that's probably the best way you can build, that you kind of allow any sort of feature to be built out and the app can just choose based on user demand. Like that's a great mental model.
Yeah, I mean, what at least the requirement that it tends to imply for us is that we need to make certain things work at a certain level of generality. So, like, we
Mhm.
want to support payments, but we don't want to tie users of the application into any specific, like, backend service configuration, right? Any specific topology, to go back to the earlier point. So that gives a
Makes
pretty
sense.
strict constraint on how the network should work, et cetera.
And then, like, how are you looking at the intense sort of mental model design space while building all of this, right? Because intense can mean a lot of things to different people. Like when I say intense, like I'm maybe talking about intent based bridges and like intent based
Hmm.
dexes, and that has different things, right? Like in car swaps context, there's a solver involved and they're like finding the best route. In a crosses context, there's like a realer uh, sending funds on the destination chain. So it really changes based on how and where it's being used. uh, and then I want to know, like, how are you looking at this rising adoption of intents, one, and then how are you thinking about incorporating intents in the Anoma architecture?
Right. Yeah, the word and broad concept of an intent has become very popular in recent years,
Mhm.
which is great. People use it to mean, slightly different, but also meaningfully related things. It's not, not totally random. At least not yet. Um, I think, I mean, Anoma maybe comes at this perspective from the very sort of first principles question of like, what can a user even want? Like, what is it possible for them to specify, right? And if I'm interacting with a discrete distributed system, I have to make my constraints and preferences explicit. Now, maybe there can be a layer on top of that, like uses a large language model to translate, I want a sandwich into some code. But at the kind of boundary of ANOMA, the protocol, right, intents have to be explicit mathematical objects. And this is, that's a boundary which could be clearly defined. So, we're talking about that in a more, it's not related to like specifically intent-based bridges, but intent-based bridges vis-a-vis this definition would be just like a class or a type of intents,
Mhm.
right? There are these specific blockchains that you want to bridge between, and you declare some constraints for when funds are allowed to move. And usually that also acts as an indication to a solver that you want something, right? And there are conditions they can move the assets and then maybe claim your assets or whatever. The specifics vary, but um, it's broadly similar in that sense. And it's nice. I mean, from Anoma has spent lots of time thinking about kind of the first principles problems and how to now we're figuring out how to connect our system to what exists in crypto today. And it's lovely that there are already intents because that makes in general, it makes it easier.
Yeah.
Still specific connectors have to be built for different things. I mean, one thing we've spent a fair amount of time on is something we call the protocol adapter, which is like a smart contract initially for the EVM, but we'll probably write one for Solana in the future and other chains that you can deploy that kind of virtualizes the Anoma state architecture. So, just like you can run an operating system on your computer and then it used to be called Parallels for Mac, or I don't know, you could use like virtual operating system virtualization software to run another operating system on top of
Mhm.
that. So the protocol adapter allows us and applications to do the same, which means as opposed to like we're not launching a new separate chain with new separate bridges or whatever.
Makes sense.
Feel like the ship has sailed on that anyway, and it's not our plan. But we instead plan to deploy these protocol adapters to at first all the EVM chains, then later maybe SVM ones, other ones, and then you can write Anoma applications, and all of these chains are available as sort of backends to order and execute transactions
Mhm.
whenever and wherever you need that to be done. And
Yeah, I
then they
mean,
can interact with intents and other stuff there.
in the Anoma thesis, like chains are actually just servers at the end to kind of like settle user transactions, right? Um, so it does align with the chain abstraction thesis as well. Like I'm just using these terms because like
Hmm hmm
they keep coming up in the interop circle. But yeah, like from that frame of reference, that totally like I totally understand where you're coming from. But I want to get your take on like where the ecosystem is today, right? Like so Solana has this clear positioning of being a monolith, and Ethereum has been struggling with its positioning for the last 2 years. But now that the prices are better, like there's less complaining about it. But I'm curious to get like your take on, because you've also seen Cosmos go through like its entire shift in like public image. So I'm curious to get your take on
Mm.
Ethereum's positioning in the broader crypto landscape today.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I feel like Ethereum is just, there's Ethereum, the blockchain, and that's a clear entity. But Ethereum, the sort of community surrounding ecosystem, it's hard to determine what the consensus function of this is. In some senses, very decentralized, which I think was the goal, and I
Yeah.
respect that. But there is an inherent tension between how kind of decentralized, distributed, even just amorphous and unclear your governance, media structure is, and being able to change direction, right?
Mhm.
Maybe on the other side of the equation, we have Bitcoin, which is does not change anything, but at least is very honest about that fact, right? Like no one is really pretending that the Bitcoin protocol is going to
I mean,
change a lot
don't you
or
think that's just a sign of the protocol kind of getting bigger than a few teams, and then it's just slow to move in bigger institutions and bigger communities. Like nothing gets done, and everything that gets done is like much slower. It takes a lot of time.
For sure. I think it's partially that, but I also think that there's a difference in Ethereum originally pitched itself as a world computer
Mhm.
and kind of originally pitched itself, frankly, for just a much broader realm of applications than it currently actually services. Like the launch video talks about IoT, it talks about sort of global payments, it talks about different kinds of, like using Ethereum to control physical property rights, like digital locks. Maybe not the launch video, but there was this Ethereum project. In the early days of Ethereum, people were really quite expansive with the scope of the applications they considered, right? It wasn't, Bitcoin has always been kind of Bitcoin is that, it's the cryptocurrency and the
Yeah.
blockchain supports the cryptocurrency. There's not a lot of ambition to do anything else. But Ethereum definitely had that ambition and I would argue has not really succeeded in delivering a system that is capable of providing for all of those applications, at least in a unified way from the perspective of users. No, it succeeded at something else, which is creating a kind of financially successful ecosystem, a big distributed community, funded a lot of great applied cryptography research, created kind of spawned lots of these other interesting projects. Which are continuing on in various directions. And there's a lot of diversity there. I
Mhm.
think that's super valuable. I mean, whether that, how that relates to the sort of success of Ethereum, like the blockchain and Ether, the asset, I think is unclear. And one particular reason it's unclear is that there's no real, um, there's just not a lot of, there's not a like economic relationship between Ethereum and all of the things which it supported. Like imagine some alternative world where instead of trying to become, ultrasound money or whatever, the Ethereum had a DAO and the DAO like invested in all the rollups, right? And it got like 20% of each rollup token or whatever. Then it doesn't, I feel like that economic structure would reflect more closely the actual reality of like what topology of value is flowing in the ecosystem. And then Ether doesn't really care if like the blockchain, generates a lot of demand or whatever,
Hmm.
right? It just has to make the ecosystem successful.
I mean,
But of course,
when you explain that, like I kind of understand where you're coming at in terms of building Anoma, because you want to see more experimentation with the type of apps that are being built out, and you sort of feel like right now that's not being catered to perfectly by the Ethereum community and the rollup centric roadmap. Like I remember reading the rollup centric roadmap, and uh, the very reason to have that sort of a roadmap was so that we see more and more experimentation in the type of apps that are built, right? Like that was the vision. But 3 years or 4 years down the line, maybe we're not seeing enough experimentation there, and that sort of leaves a gap in kind of in all of us, right? Like it's just payments and finance apps and like lending apps and maybe some games here and there. But I'm personally not using too many apps on a daily basis, and that kind
mhm.
of does bother me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know if um, the roll-up centric roadmap was pretty vague. I mean, it was like, we are not going to do execution sharding anymore. Maybe because it's hard, maybe because we just don't want to, whatever. But instead, people will launch these things which are called rollups, which have some security-ish relation to Ethereum. Maybe they send data to Ethereum. That's always been a little amorphous, but like something, like they got to do
Mhm.
something. And they will, innovate in different execution systems, different applications. That I mean, I think that's a laudable goal. I feel like the one thing that really missed is figuring out what it would take for all of those applications to interoperate with each other.
Yeah.
I mean, many of the most valuable things that, basically the entire point of crypto is building multi-user applications. If you don't
Mhm.
want to build a multi-user application, you just don't need this stuff, right? You can just like build an application for Windows or Mac, or, if you're building a, Candy, I don't know, the like Bejeweled game or whatever is going to date me. But, there's just one user. You don't need a distributed system. You don't need a blockchain. You don't need any of this. It doesn't matter. So if we're building multi-user applications, then already from that we can kind of we should ask ourselves the question of, okay, how are these users going to interact with each other, and how are applications going to interact with each other? And this is what I think the central question the rollup centric roadmap not only missed, but even doesn't even seem to have recognized as important.
Hmm.
And I think that's a strategic mistake
It makes
from
sense.
the perspective of.
When I did read the roll-up centric roadmap, like it was back in 2020, so I was not looking at it from like the interop perspective, right? Like how do you solve interop? Because I did not have all of this context that I have 5 years later. But Vitalik posted recently that Ethereum is the world ledger, and you had a very interesting quote tweet on that. Like everyone wants interop, and like they want to share data with like apps, other applications, and if there is a world ledger, that's like having a single government for the entire world. So, I mean, yeah, like, do you think this interop issue gets fixed at some point, or why do you think we're even here at this in this position that interop was just left for the ecosystem to figure out?
It's a good question. I mean, as to why the Ethereum Foundation didn't prioritize interop, you'll have to ask them. I think they're doing so now, and it's not fair to,
I know,
to
I'm
throw
just
all
like
the
thinking
blame.
about this now after all of this time, right? Like, okay,
Right, right.
we had everything figured out. Like, these are the types of apps we'll build, these are the types of rollups we'll build. But when you think about it, like interop just seems like an obvious problem that we will see if there are so many rollups and applications. Why was it not even mentioned back then?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer, I don't know. I don't know the whole evolution of the kind of Ethereum
Yeah,
political ecosystem, right? I there definitely were, people and efforts working on that. There were early efforts with Swarm and Whisper to build sort of peer-to-peer and storage systems. Um, I mean, I think that people kind of over the years, people grew to accept what I would consider a rhetorical sleight of hand, which is to say Ethereum is a world computer, and then the thing that you're talking about is just the Ethereum blockchain. A
yeah.
blockchain is not a world computer. A blockchain is just a blockchain. It's one place where you order transactions. It has one set of validators. It has like one rule set, typically one token. Not everyone should be agreeing on one blockchain for everything. It's
Have
a
you
single
ever
point
had
of
that
failure
like
that you don't need.
semantics debate with Vitalik? Like, what is a world computer and what is a blockchain?
Ooh, maybe not yet. He didn't respond to me, so I'd be happy to. And maybe it's not fair to pick on Vitalik, right? This is not,
Yeah, I'm
maybe
just like, yeah,
he retweeted some, whatever, but it's mostly all the Ethereum shills on Twitter who are guilty of this. But the thing is, it changed over time in my view. Like initially in the launch video and in some of the early proposals for Ethereum, I don't think they thought that the world computer was just the blockchain. They had
hmm,
diagrams that featured Swarm and Whisper. They were clearly thinking about these other network components that would be necessary. I mean, the EVM itself has this kind of object system. It was just never extended to the multi-chain case. I think it just kind of got like it's hard. Interop is a very hard problem. I would argue it's the hardest problem in distributed
yeah.
systems. And so of course it's like, it's hard to kind of own up to like what is this really going to take if we want to ship this. Um, but sort of, yeah, somehow over the years it got a little bit swept under the rug. And it's also difficult because of course once you have an ecosystem, then in order to, interop must be standardized, right? This is the
Hmm.
hard thing. And in order to agree on that, you need, some kind of political interoperability. And it's difficult to,
I mean,
agree
that's
on a
where we are
standard of.
today.
Right, exactly, but yeah, so
Hmm.
maybe this could have been foreseen, but of course, Ethereum has also fostered tons of innovation. I mean, I consider it a smashing success. I think people only ask this question because they still expect something more, right? Like maybe they
Hmm.
expect the original world computer vision. Maybe they just want ETH to go up. Like there are many different reasons. Um,
There was an interesting question on Twitter. I think it was on A Priori's podcast. Like, if
mhm.
you were the Ethereum dictator, what would you do? So I want to ask that question to you because I feel like you would have a very interesting perspective on
If I were the Ethereum dictator, what choices can I make? Can I mint ETH and assign it to people?
it. Anything, you're the dictator.
Yes. If I were the Ethereum dictator, what would I do?
But
I
you have to
would
solve some of these problems, the problems that we're talking about.
Yes. I think I would change the issuance system so that an
Mm-hmm.
organization had the ability to mint the token. I think that's very important if you want to seriously pursue like any kind of strategic agenda. Um, Having this very passive monetary policy that just sends tokens to stakers just doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
I would I don't know, try to buy out a bunch of the roll-up teams. They have very good distributed systems engineers, something the Ethereum Foundation has historically lacked. Um, just mint the token, buy them out. Um, you can even
The infinite money glitch technique.
it doesn't need to be infinite. I mean, like, look, the market cap of Ethereum is
It's like 400
uh
billion.
right. So just take 0.5% of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can I mean buy out all the distributed systems engineering teams you need, right? I would maybe do the same for some of these, whatever these Silicon Valley companies are doing and trying to poach AI talent, just, fight them on a little bit. Maybe that's secondary, kind of a side quest, but if I mean, who are we competing with, right? Are we competing with like other cryptocurrencies, other blockchains? Are we competing with the banks? Are we just trying to sell our technology to the banks? Or are we competing with, OpenAI and these companies who are going to try to build the world's, next super app where all of your data goes through? That's a choice, right? But
Mm-hmm.
in my view, crypto tends to be too, just very like internally focused. And there are lots of other companies in the world with lots of capital, and they are just trying to build better products. And if we don't compete with them, we will, probably lose.
Mm-hmm.
So the financial engineering can only get you so far, right?
But yeah, like having extra money to buy out teams and also like build cooler tech does help.
Yeah, I would do that. I mean, I think maybe also, split the. I think one challenge the Ethereum Foundation has is that they don't want to like control the direction of the, Ethereum blockchain too
Mm-hmm.
much because, of course, it's already there. I respect that, but I think you don't really need to do that. Just like launch another thing, launch the like Ethereum Foundation roll up, which will do whatever the Ethereum Foundation wants and iterate on the technology there and try out your interop protocols there
Mm-hmm.
and, use the token minting to fund whatever you need to do there.
I mean, like
And
the Solana Foundation approach, like there's really like no correct way to do this, I guess. Like it just what works out eventually, and if people are happy with it and they trade offs with it.
right. And just, I mean, just optimize for the goal of quickly iterating, right? You don't have to quickly iterate the actual distributed live system, of course. That must be done slowly. But you
Mm-hmm.
can quickly iterate something else, right? Instead of just trying to slowly steer the distributed live system, forget about it. Just let it be for a few years. It'll be fine. Iterate on like trying to build something that enables much better applications for users, sort of like, the real world computer functionality that was originally promised.
I mean, so like what can we expect from Anoma in the next 6 months, right? Because we talked a lot about Ethereum, the need for better apps, and I know Anoma is trying to build something very generalized that can usher in this future at some point. But like talking from a next 6 months or like 2025 perspective, what can the ecosystem expect from you guys?
Yeah, I mean, concretely, we're going to start deploying protocol adapters.
Hmm.
So these are the smart contracts initially for EVM chains that you can use to run Anoma transactions. And we'll deploy, some example applications on top of that that use the Anoma state model. So you can, for example, send shielded payments on any EVM chain on top of a protocol adapter. Initially there are some like these systems were not they were built separately, so it's not, sending shielded payments on a protocol adapter costs more gas than just sending regular payments on the EVM. But for some users, that's probably worth it for the shielded functionality. There's this kind of I don't know, complaint that these, EVM and other base layers don't support some of these, privacy or some other features in the base layer. And that complaint is fair, but I think most of that can actually be added with the protocol adapter. Like if you want
Hmm.
Ethereum main chain security for your shielded payment, that's totally possible. So hopefully that offers something of interest to folks. And then probably, maybe more tail end of those 6 months, we're aiming to deploy what we call our controller system, which is kind of the Anoma state architecture level interop. So
Hmm.
where you have an application that can distribute its state across many chains, sort of high level objects can talk to objects on multiple chains. So it's interop at a little bit of a higher level of abstraction, at least as compared to IBC, which I worked on before. It deals purely with message passing and authentication. And that's part of controllers, but the abstraction we try to provide is that you have a single application and its state is just in some sense sharded, but some of those shards are, have different security domains instead of, yeah, in addition to just different
I mean,
concurrency.
I love your description of privacy because I think I read one of your tweets or one of your blog posts, and you described privacy as the freedom to reveal information, right? So when you frame privacy this way, I feel like it changes the conversation from like being about keeping a secret to more like controlling your data, right? Because anytime anyone talks about privacy, it's like, oh, tornado cash. Like, I don't want
Right,
to
right, right.
share information about my wallet and all of those issues. But like, how are you thinking about privacy from like a controlling data perspective?
Right. I mean, yeah, I think the metaphors are kind of misleading because when you think about privacy, it's like, oh, I will take an action to get privacy. Like I will close my blinds and
Yeah.
then my neighbor can't see what I'm doing. And in a world where light rays are bouncing around all the time, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like you have to take an action to hide. The sort of default is visible. But this is not how a distributed digital system works. Like your computer is connected to a network and a message gets sent over that network if your computer chooses to send that message. Like the only decision you could ever make is what information to choose to reveal, right? Like you can't do something to hide it. There's just not possible. Either you
Mhm.
send it or you don't, right? And if you encrypt it to somebody, then you're revealing it like just to that person as opposed to everybody. So, the choice, which sort of fully transparent distributed ledgers like Ethereum or Solana, at least the base layer, force users to make is, do I disclose my transaction information to everybody, or do I not send a transaction at all? Right? It's very
Yeah.
binary. And what at least Anoma's technology can add to that is just making that spectrum, more complete. So you can choose who to disclose what information to. You can disclose, if you need to disclose information for compliance purposes, you can do that. If you need to disclose, if you want to disclose information just because you want to, you can do that. All of the choices are available to you, right? It's not up to the technology what the user chooses to disclose. It's up to the user. But
Wait, so,
we
so
can
this
at
kind
least.
of bypasses any regulatory or compliance issues as well, because like you said, with Ethereum and like Tornado Cash in particular, it was white or black, right? Like there was no gray area where you can kind of decide what to do with it or like whom to share information with. But with Anoma, you can actually do that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes some of those things are even possible in existing systems as well. I feel like there may be the rhetoric around it has created a lot of confusion. Like just sometimes when I read U.S. court briefs or other, draft legislation, I I'm tempted to like interpret just sort of honest, well-intentioned misunderstanding. I don't think they understand what the technology does.
Yeah.
Like if you, the government, want to require that someone disclose specific information, I mean, you can do that.
Mhm.
No, the technology doesn't have anything to do with this, right? I mean, now whether, if a user discloses that information or not, maybe you punish them if they don't disclose it. I don't know. Like this is not a question that the technologists are really sort of able or appropriate to answer. I mean, the question of what kinds of disclosures should be required, I think that's an important democratic question that at least those of us who value living in democratic societies and participating in collective decision making, should care about. But it's not a question about technology.
Hmm.
Um,
I
so
mean,
I
but
feel like this
I would
getting
not
confused a
blame
bit.
the government for that because I feel like even users in crypto do not get that nuance, right? Like, I mean, and in general, crypto's image does not help with this, right? Like, if you build a tool like Tornado Cash and then everyone thinks crypto is a scam anyway, and it's being used for like illegal activities, these things do not really help us with anything.
For sure, for sure. I mean, some of the branding is quite misleading. Like hide your data. Like, no, that's not what's happening. Does your bank say hide your data? I mean, because they actually, they do the same thing that they selectively disclose it, right? Maybe they selectively disclose it to advertising agencies. Like, I don't know. But they're doing it. It's not, what the database backend is doesn't really have much to do with this choice.
Makes sense. Interesting.
Crypto just gives more options.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the features that I'm definitely looking forward to, kind of seeing how the adoption develops over the next 12, 18 months, because I feel like as more and more institutions also come into crypto, like maybe that'll be a feature that they request. So I think that'll like shift the conversation entirely from privacy being looked at as like hiding data to being more selective with what data and
Hmm.
whom you share it with.
For sure. I mean, often the regulation is also like quote unquote on the other side. Like it's actually a regulatory requirement not to disclose, personally identifying information. So many companies, especially financial institutions, can't legally use transparent blockchains as they exist today.
Mhm. And I mean, last question, like you've been building for 3 years right now, like 3 years in at Anoma. What do you think is the one thing that people misunderstand about the project? Like, what is that one thing that people don't get at all?
Hmm. Um, that's a good question. I mean, I think the popularity of the term and concept of intents has created a lot of different impressions about what an intent specifically is. And I think some people might think Anoma is trying to solve a certain, it's like a bridge or something. And that's probably not a great mental model. But I mean, I think, um, also really like, I feel like I think it's actually, I find it now. So when I go try and explain Anoma to people, it's easier for me to explain Anoma to people who don't work in crypto. At
Yeah,
least
that
people
makes
who have like distributed systems or even TradFi experience,
sense.
because they aren't to be a bit opinionated, like they're just not they didn't drink the crypto Kool-Aid. There's
Yeah.
a lot of Kool-Aid, like base roll-ups, Kool-Aid. Some of these sort of imaginary architectures, Kool-Aid. Not that it's necessarily like, I'm not saying it's a scam, but it's kind of a cult-like understanding of even what kinds of things exist. It's like a ontology of distributed systems
Mhm.
that's just not very it's not very um, clear. There's like the impression of things being architectural categories when they really aren't, and like
Mhm.
crypto has all these layers because there's a lot of incentive to do sort of technical marketing and make it seem like you've invented some big new system, even if it's just kind of a minor change.
I mean, you
um
you also launched the Anoma Yap campaign recently, right? So I can't help but think that did not really help a lot. Like people do not really take time to understand the nuance. It's a lot of like Chat GPT AI slop content.
yep, you are totally right, and I agree with you. Yeah, I'm sorry that we contribute to that. I mean, it's kind of it's a multipolar trap at this point, right? Like,
Yeah,
at least I feel like Kaido will destroy Twitter, and I am in favor of destroying Twitter. Um, so
nice. I
I
mean,
don't know. There's a lot of variance. Like some people do I think learn some things. We've made some interesting connections, but yeah, there's also a lot of slop. I mean, we don't. Yeah, we have only indirect influence over this, but
what are you excited about for the next 6 months?
I'm excited about shipping and people actually being able to use the software. We've been in the
Mhm.
research and development phase for years, and not that I don't like research and development, but it's time to shift mindsets. And every sort of product interaction a user has where they get value out of Anoma. That's what I'm here for. So
Amazing. Honestly, like I'm looking forward to the final launch, like when it happens, because I feel like I've been reading about Anoma, listening about Anoma for so long, so I'm kind of like waiting for it to come to market and see what you guys have built. And best of luck for that.
thank you. Well, I do still think it will take time. I mean,
Yeah,
we're kind of we've spent years in our cave, or so to speak, doing our R&D, and now we're trying to map that back to the existing blockchain ecosystem, also figure out, how we can leverage it to useful products in the short and midterm, et cetera.
awesome.
Step by step.
Thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you.